wanted to do a video today on something that I see being very prevalent within not just abusive relationships, but also like relationships where someone perhaps might be involved in addiction, and then a family member, friend, or spouse is feeling like they're slowly turning into an enabler. And that thing that I see being continually present is what I would call the helpless, fragile child. This is a tool that I see being used in lots of different relationships, like the ones I just listed, and probably more. I see it showing up and holding a lot of people hostage in these relationships. Again, I have personal experience in things like this myself, so that's another reason why I can speak to it, because the child, the helpless child, mirage of sorts, held me hostage in a lot of relationships too. If I would have to summarize the two things that held me hostage the most in these types of abusive relationships, it was probably the cool girl trope, which held me hostage inside of myself. And I would say that the helpless child held me hostage in the relationship because that's how I saw the other person. So for those of you that have watched the Storyteller Techniques video, you pretty much remember what I said in that, in terms of how these two roles are introduced, the role for them and the role for you. And where I want to start in this video is from the place of you having accepted the role. So after they've done all of this and you have accepted the broken role, and you've also allowed them to essentially become the storyteller, then you sort of move into phase 2 of this stuff. And that's where I would almost call it entering the dollhouse of sorts. You're just kind of inside, you've now come inside the dollhouse. And the reason why I would call it a dollhouse is because in so many of these relationships, not necessarily with addiction and enablers, I'm not necessarily touching on that today, but more so, again, within these relationships that I'm constantly sort of making videos about, I really would call it a dollhouse, because I would say that everyone is pretending in the roles that they have. This is a very fantasy-based experience, and you're not really being yourself. You're trying to be something else that's required of you. You're trying to be perfect. You're trying to imitate the things that they want. And I would also say that they, for various different reasons, are not truly being themselves either. And so it just very much feels like a dollhouse in that sense. Everyone's playing house. Everyone's trying to imitate the things that they've seen in movies, or the things that they've witnessed their friends doing successfully in relationships on the outside, but they're not actually successfully doing it. So now that you've accepted the roles and you've accepted that you're going to partake in this story of sorts, this fantasy with them, I would say that the child, when the child gets introduced, it's around the same time that their real self starts to show, that the other person's mask essentially falls away. The lies, the ways that they were pretending to be, whether that was to intentionally entrap you or simply because they have a lot of internal stuff going on that they feel ashamed of and they didn't want to show, the real self starts to emerge. And I feel that the child is always shown around the same time as the real self, because the child is a necessary tool that's used hand in hand with the real self showing. Because oftentimes when we see the real self of the other person, it's very shocking. It's very different than what we had expected. It's oftentimes drastically different. And so the child image and the helpless, fragile child persona is a very successful tool that's used to fix that problem. I also wanted to clarify, it's not just like when you see the real version of them. This is also a tool that's used when you start realizing that they're lying to you about a bunch of stuff, when you start seeing the cracks show in the fantasy of whatever it is that they've been hiding from you. It's not just about when you see that they have some like serious psychological issues going on. It's when any cracks show in any of the facades that they've been presenting to you. For people who this is not their first time getting involved in like stories like this, they probably have already fallen into the habit of infantilizing people. This probably isn't the first time that they've run into a child image or created a child image of someone themselves. They might already have it as a coping mechanism for their own reasons. But what we essentially do, so the person, the con artist of sorts, creates the child persona to overcompensate for and fix the problem of their real self showing. For whether it's your first time doing it or whether you've done it before, we in turn infantilize them. And I really like the definition of infantilizing because I think it calls out very clearly what we're doing. And the definition that I found of infantilizing is treating someone as a child or in a way which denies their maturity in age or experience, because that really is what we're doing. We are denying their real age and we are denying their real life experiences. We're denying them to ourselves, we're denying them to other people. We're denying them to that person. That person's asking us to deny them, and we are also denying them. But this person has been around for a while. This person has plenty of life experiences most of the time, and we are denying those things. And so we infantilize them. And that is a very necessary key part to this relationship being successful. I personally think, from what I've witnessed with myself and what I've witnessed with my other friends who are trapped inside of addiction to abuse, I really, truly do not believe that the abuse could be successful, and the control within the relationship could not be successful without the child being present, without this child image and this helpless, fragile child tool being used. I do not think it would work. In my opinion, this is a key part to the abuse within relationships and the control within relationships. When people don't understand why the person is staying, when people don't understand what is truly holding that person back to continue to be in the relationship, yes, you have the honeymoon cycle of abuse. You have where they're cripplingly horrible, and then they're coming back and they're being amazing. But one thing that is a part of that amazing honeymoon stage, when everything becomes good again, a key part to getting back to that good part is the child tool. In my personal opinion, from the experiences that I've had and what I've seen my friends go through as well, after being whatever version of abusive or manipulative or selfish that they are, in order to be able, because someone can't always just pendulum swing back to being fine, right? We do have emotions, obviously, we're not robots. So we are hurt, we are emotionally damaged from the experience, we're in shock. You know, oftentimes we're numb, we're shut down, you know, our mind has left the room. There's all these reactions that we have to the trauma of what's just occurred. And in order to get us back to where we can forgive them and be okay with them again, in order to get us out of all of those trauma reactions that we're having of sorts, the child is a key part. It's a necessary tool to get us back to the good part. Hey again. You know, I always forget to say stuff. And I just want to clarify here that it isn't like this is just a one and done, where it's like, oh, something really terrible happens and then they show me the child and then like we're good again. Like oftentimes there's rippling effects. There's ripples left over from whatever it is that's happened. You know what I mean? And oftentimes, because there isn't just one incident, because there's lots of incidents that continue to happen that we never get to fully process, that we're still constantly recovering from while another one happens. There's all these like leftover ripples going on inside of us. And so I'm not saying that the child tool is just used in one argument to get someone to get over their feelings. I'm saying the child tool, therefore, is introduced as a constant thing that gets brought up again and again, that gets shown again and again, that gets used again and again throughout the relationship whenever they sense that you might be pulling away, whenever they sense that they might be losing control, whenever they sense that your image of them might be in a way that they don't like. This gets used in many different ways, but I still think that it is a part of the entire cycle of the honeymoon stage of abuse, if that makes sense. I just realized I'm saying honeymoon stages of abuse, but I mean merry-go-round stages of abuse. Whatever, we're rolling with it. Artists don't make mistakes. Yeah. And this piece, I would say, is within people who are addicts and their families who are enablers as well. Like after the addict has shocked or hurt the family in whatever kind of way, whether it's from stealing from them or just outright lying to them, whatever they've done that has caused the family shock and awe and trauma, I believe that the child tool, the helpless, fragile child tool, is also necessary to get the family back as well, oftentimes. So you can see this used in a lot of different places, but I do see it being extremely common. And I think what's so interesting about this specific, the idea of abusive relationships is, once you've accepted the roles and the story being offered to you, you are now essentially within a confined space. You're not necessarily physically confined, but you've entered a psychological vacuum of sorts. And in more brief encounters, the child can't necessarily be used. So like in my first video of storyteller techniques, I talked about how these storyteller techniques can absolutely be used in advertising, in business, in jobs. And that is 1,000% true. But in more brief experiences that are not more insulated and confined psychologically, the child's not necessarily as useful. There are times where it can be used in passing, but I do see this being something that emerges in more intimate settings. So intimate, in fact, that sometimes I really think that the child image and the child mirage that's being presented, the family and friends on the outside never really see it. It's that intimate. It's something that emerges slowly within the secrecy and the privacy of the relationship. And again, when friends and family are not understanding why someone is staying outside of the atrocities which are occurring, I think this is a key part that the family's also not seeing, how the person regresses into this fawning and this just artifice of a helpless, fragile child. And I'll touch on like what that actually looks like, but I do think that it's just something that's more secret. Like I know for the men that I've been with in the past, my family never saw those sides of them. There's so many more private personas that emerge. There's so many private memories that happen in general in these experiences, but this is one of them, is experiencing this child of sorts. And so why must the child be used? I already kind of touched on it. It's to sort of fix the real self emerging, but it's also deeper than that. Like if you think about this person in terms of a con artist, all con artists must use tools. Because what is a con artist? A con artist is a liar, right? You can't be an effective liar without having tools to use. Otherwise, everyone would see that you're a liar. So it's inevitable that tools must come with being a con artist. And I also just wanted to clarify that I'm using the word con artist, but like all of these terms are honestly very interchangeable for me. In my very first video that I ever made about 4 ways that adults are groomed, I sometimes get kickback in the comment section, which is fine. We can all have our own opinion, but there are some people that don't feel that I should be using grooming so interchangeably with just manipulativeness. But I personally disagree, because if you look at people who are house burglars, if you look at people who are con artists, if you look at people who are groomers, and if you look at people who are manipulators, they all are very similar, because they're all someone who wants something from you. And they're all someone who are willing to use, false flattery, false promises, fraud in any form, lies in any form, deception, magic, essentially, in whatever form, to get the thing that they want from you. The thing may vary in what they want, which is why a house burglar might not be called the same thing as a groomer. And so in that sense, I do understand the counter argument that you would use different words for those things. But really, at the end of the day, the techniques are incredibly similar, because really at the end of the day, what's going on is very similar. And the other thing I want to clarify with this is, so you have a con artist in the relationship. You're essentially in a relationship with a con artist. But, that doesn't necessarily mean that like the person that they're with isn't a manipulator of sorts either. I have definitely seen relationships, and I'm no angel myself, you know what I mean? But I think it's interesting how people will assume in these relationships, like, okay, if this is a con artist, then the other person must be this like innocent angel who's just like a perfect empath and has no flaws. And it's not like that at all. My dad definitely conned my mom. And my mom has borderline personality and definitely has demons of her own, I mean, like, I was in relationships with people with attachment disorders of whatever kind, but that doesn't mean that I didn't have my own addictions and therefore my own version of manipulativeness going on as well. So this isn't, for me, it's not angels versus demons. And just because someone's in a relationship with a con artist doesn't mean that automatically wipes their slate clean either. So The child must be used because it's a powerful tool. And you know, con artists have lots of different tools that they use. This is like literally a video that I found on the internet just showing some examples of, this woman's literally talking about con artists specifically, pickpocketers or whatever, you know, just fraudulent people in general. So I'm going to play this, and she just talks about a few of the tools that they use, but I'm just showing you this to get back to my point about this tool.
One of the hallmarks of the good con artist is that it never feels like they're taking advantage of you. They are never taking anything from you. You give it to them willingly. So actually the term confidence artist came out of a man in the 1800s in New York City who would walk around on the streets of Manhattan dressed as a very dapper gentleman, and he'd approach other likewise dapper gentlemen and say, have you the confidence in me to lend me your watch until tomorrow? I mean, what a strange request, right? And so much is it's such a loaded question. You know, what kind of a person are you? What kind of a world and society do we live in? Are you abiding by the gentleman's code of conduct? You know, are you going to trust me? Are you going to give me your confidence? Well, people would give him their watches, and he obviously had no intention of ever giving them back. By the time that he was finally caught, he had lots of watches to his name and gave birth to the name Confidence Man. You give them your confidence. They don't take it. You give them money. They never take it from you. I mean, think about someone like Bernie Madoff. People had to beg to invest with him. He would say no. He would turn them away. Sometimes people waited for years before he finally accepted their money, and he did it, you know, as if he were doing them a huge favor. Okay, fine, you know, I'll take your money. And they were so grateful. Please take more, Bernie, take more, because he was doing them such a huge favor. One of the hallmarks of the confidence artist is something called Machiavellianism. It has to do with manipulating people for your own ends, getting them to do what you want them to do, but without their knowledge, so that they don't realize they're being manipulated, so that they think that everything they're doing is of their own volition. People hate feeling manipulated. The moment you think you're being manipulated, you drop out. You say, hey, no one tells me what to do. Who are you to manipulate me? And so the con doesn't work. So the trick is, how do I, you know, give you the germ of the idea so that you think it's your idea? How do I set up a situation so that it's your proposal, not my proposal, so that you're the one who's in charge? Then there are ways of framing requests that we know are more likely to be successful. For instance, there's a technique that's called the foot in the door. Get your foot in the door, and then you can ask for what you really want. So how do you get the foot in the door? First, you ask for something really, really small. So I might ask you for just 2 minutes of your time. I want your opinion on, you know, a purchase I'm making. And I know that I really trust your opinion on cell phones. So can you just help me out? Do you like your phone? You know, what do you like about it? Okay, wonderful, thank you so much. We're done. A few weeks later, you might ask me to, you know, donate, or rather, I might ask you, since I'm the one who's the con artist in this scenario, I might ask you to, you know, write me a letter of recommendation, or donate an hour of your time to a volunteer organization I work for, or whatever my real ask is. But because you've helped me in the past, even though it was a very, very small favor that you were asking, you're much more likely to help me now, because we like to be consistent. So repeat requests are really hard to say no to, but sometimes we have to. Sometimes you have to realize that, you know what, just because I said yes once doesn't mean that I should say yes a second time, and it doesn't make me a bad person to say no. There's a technique called the door in the face, which is the opposite of the foot in the door. So you ask for something egregious. You know, I don't really know you very well, but I'm going to ask you to spend a day at the zoo with my students. And you're going to say, are you insane? In your mind, you probably wouldn't say this to my face, but you're certainly going to say no, because that's something that's really a huge amount of time. And so then a few weeks later, I'll say, oh, no, of course, I totally understand. It was, you know, it's a huge imposition. I totally get it. Don't worry about it. A few weeks later, I come back to you and say, hey, would you be willing to come in and talk to my class for an hour and then, you know, answer some questions? You're going to say yes, even though that's a huge request still. And if I had just asked you that, you probably would have said no, but you're still feeling so guilty about saying no the first time around, even though I said that I really didn't mind and that I totally understood, you're going to be feeling so guilty that you're going to say yes. Door in the face. First, you make them slam the door in your face, because slamming the door in someone's face feels terrible. And we hate feeling like bad human beings, so then we'll try to redeem ourselves, and then we'll become your best friend. We'll keep helping you. Once again, something that uses human emotion and our perception of ourselves against us. We want to feel like good people. Con artists know this, and they take advantage of it by making us do things that will make us feel like good people, and putting us in situations where it's really difficult to refuse, because refusing would mean we're not good people. And that's not a feeling that we're comfortable with at all.
So those are some tools that con artists can use, and this is another one, you know, and really it's because at the end of the day, the lies are not sustainable, the false self is not sustainable. Also, their interest in you and their desire for you, if they struggle from sex addiction or intimacy issues or whatever else, you know, their desire for you might not be sustainable. That's going to wax and wane, and you're going to feel the effects of that. You know, their addictions are going to wax and wane. There's lots of changing and moving parts within these relationships oftentimes, because the person, either one or both people, are very emotionally unstable. And so the child is a very, very effective tool to use to re-stabilize everything and re-regulate everything after a giant mess has been made. And I'm not justifying it, but I just think that there's a reason why it's so common in so many different forms of messy relationships of sorts. There's a reason why it's so common, you know, and I think it's a very, very powerful manipulative tool. So I've seen the child show up in my own relationships. The only way I can describe it is that it really feels like the child version of them. You know, when I've been involved with these men, it feels like this is their real self, and I'm the only one getting to see it. And it feels like someone who is deeply remorseful, almost to the point of like crucifying themselves sometimes. That's a way that it can show up sometimes. Sometimes it shows up as someone who literally has like panic attacks and doesn't know how to emotionally regulate themselves on their own. And so they seem weak and fragile and helpless, and like they need you to be the rescuer in that sense, which is so interesting because the hero trope exists within like both people, but for completely different reasons, you know? And that's also interesting to examine as well, because I think they seduce us in at first, pretending to be the hero of our story. And then oftentimes they end up bleeding us dry as we attempt to actually be the hero to them. And the slow or sometimes very fast change of those roles is very, very interesting. But those things are done for very different reasons. One is to entrap, and one oftentimes is from like literally codependency. So not that great either. Yeah. Another way I've seen it show up is one of my friends, their spouse is just constantly sick. And from what I've seen, I don't think a lot of the illnesses are real. But that keeps them in that constant, like, helpless state that makes the other person feel like they can't leave, no matter how unhappy they are, because this person truly is helpless. I don't think, as I'm saying this, I hope everybody understands, like, I'm not saying they, like, literally emotionally regress into a 5-year-old, and then you're just, like, so drawn in by the toddler in front of you that you can't leave the relationship. It's not that. It feels like seeing just the younger, it feels like the true side of them that no one else gets to see. That's how it feels. I'm not saying that's what it is, but that's what it feels like. It feels like everyone else sees this very like exuberant and extroverted side that's never broken, or, you know, maybe it's a side that's darker and more moody, and we see those sides too, but we convince ourselves that no one else has seen this sort of like younger, more emotionally vulnerable part of them that we are seeing. And because we've had the honor of seeing it, because they've had the bravery to show it to us, we can't leave, because I think the child inside also offers us hope that that might be what they eventually continue to be. that it's not just a mask or a facade, but it's what they eventually could be again if we just stick around and wait long enough and continue to help them get back to that point of being that vulnerable, real person. Another way that I've seen the child self is that I've had several guys that I've been with where they told me that they essentially have like no close family, and they're lonely and they're isolated and they need me because without me they won't have anyone. So that's another way that the child has shown up. I would say a lot of times it just really feels like the boy of who they were before they became the horrible person that they are now. It feels like just the younger version of them who they were before. That's just like the only way I know how to say it. I know I'm being repetitive, but that really is what it feels like. And it feels like once you've seen it, it's like a gift that you don't want to get rid of, because it feels rare and special, and like you've seen a fairy in the woods, you know, and then I think it adds to our egos as well because we have gotten to see this thing. I think a lot of times in the dollhouse, the strangest thing about it is, yes, it's a place where everyone is imitating a role and no one's being truly who they are because there's no like room for you. There's no emotional maturity and room for you to be who you truly are. I think that's one piece of it, but it also very much because of that becomes like sort of a labyrinth and a house of mirrors of sorts. Like that's one of the hardest reasons also why it's difficult to get out of the dollhouse and the fantasy once you're in it, is because every time you attempt to leave, more false images, more false characters get thrown at you, which make it very disorienting and confusing because you're trying to hold on to the real, true version of them that you know that you've seen and experienced, which is abusive, controlling, demeaning, whatever version of it is. You're trying to logically hold on to that in your mind, but if they're presenting you with these helpless, false, fragile versions of themselves, some part of you feels drawn back in. Some part of you feels like you do want to be a good person, and it might reflect badly on you to leave someone in that kind of state. Just like the woman talked about in the video, many people want to feel like they're a good person. I would say even deeper in these types of relationships, the unfortunate thing that you also have going on and being used against you is the fact that you need to feel complete. Not only do you want to feel like a good person, but you need to feel complete, and you need to feel like you have the approval of others. It's more of a need, which is why it's a deeper vulnerability, and it's also a deeper hole inside of you that's being used against you. That void, that part of you that's broken, they're twisting and manipulating that broken part of you because it's not strong enough to stand up for itself. It's not strong enough to withstand the twisting and the testing. One of the bravest things I think for survivors to figure out how to do is to be okay with feeling like a bad person, because most of the time you're not actually a bad person, because you're sitting around sweating about whether you're a bad person or not, and you're trying so hard to not be one, because that's your friggin' baseline. You being a jerk is probably not half as bad as a lot of the other jerks out there, but that is truly what like holds you hostage, you know? And it requires so much courage and so much bravery from survivors to be like, you know what? I'm gonna just have to choose to be okay with feeling like I'm a bad person, abandoning this like helpless, broken, fragile person who's saying that they can't survive without me. I'm going to have to be okay with leaving that child behind. And I know that sounds really dramatic, but that's actually what it feels like. It has felt like that for me. But just as another thing that I wanted to say, you know, there's another way to sort of help remind yourself that this is a lie. There's two things that you can do to kind of test the lie. There's a lot of ways to call people out on their tells, to find people's tells, to find the truth in the situation, because it's always there. And there's two ways. One, because I've seen this with a lot of people who are like this, who are using helpless, fragile, broken roles to milk people's sympathy and to hold them hostage. One thing that I would urge you to pay attention to, this happened a lot in my past relationships. This was an aspect that was present, was that if you look at them and you're thinking, oh, they're helpless, oh, they're fragile, oh, they're broken, do they have a really well-paying job? Just something to ask yourself. That's not always present. That's not always present in these relationships. It was present in mine, And for one of my closest friends, it's always present in hers with her abusers. They'll be acting like they're fragile and helpless and need her, and yet they literally make 3 times the amount of money that she does in a year. And the reason why this matters isn't because if you have a bunch of money, it solves all of your problems, and you can't be fragile or broken in any kind of way if you have a bunch of money. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that oftentimes these people are incredibly charismatic, and they have the ability to shapeshift. They have the ability to show a lot of fortitude and the ability to push on in a way that not everybody can. And oftentimes when people are in very successful businesses, it shows that they're not as fragile and helpless as we're thinking that they are, in the sense that if we were to leave, their entire life would fall apart and they wouldn't be able to literally function as a person without us. I just encourage people to look at their career path and how successful they're doing, because oftentimes that shows how much they actually can take care of themselves on their own, because oftentimes we're not building their business with them. We have nothing to do with their day jobs. And so they're able to show all of this ability to hold their shit together and keep themselves together as a person without us in their day jobs. But then when they're with us, that's when they fall apart, and that's when they're broken and helpless and they can't do anything without our help. And it just doesn't compute and make sense. And the other thing I would encourage you to look around and observe to counteract the helpless child mirage is what kind of resources have they accumulated for themselves? Because if they've managed to get you, they've probably managed to get other things too, because they're a con artist. So just look around and see, like, what other types of very resourceful friendships do they have? What other resources in general do they have? Have they figured out how to get like welfare or social security, even though they're technically not eligible for it? Have they figured out how to manipulate the system? Have they figured out how to manipulate anything around them? Have they figured out how to manipulate the community around them in some kind of way to where they're getting resources that you haven't even figured out how to tap into? Those 2 things alone are key indicators that someone's not as truly helpless and fragile as they say that they are. Because I've met truly fragile, helpless people, and they can't even freaking get out of bed, let alone manipulate their community, let alone have a 6-figure paying job and have a more successful career than I've ever accomplished. The other thing I would encourage you to look at, just to see if this has happened to you. If you're like, I can't tell, you know what I mean? I'm not sure. The other thing I would encourage you to look at within the relationship is, are there things that you didn't want to do, or were there things that you didn't want to be at the beginning of the relationship? Things you didn't want to give away, ways you didn't want to act, sorts of behavior you didn't want to engage in. Whatever it is, donations of sorts to them that you initially didn't want to make, favors you didn't want to give, whatever it was, try to remember if there were things at the beginning of the relationship that you didn't want to give away, that you didn't want to do, ways that you didn't want to be. And then look at the relationship now and see if you are giving those things away, if you are doing those things, and if you are acting in a way that you never wanted to act. And whether the blame goes on them or not, all of this aside, that right there, first of all, should be a giant red flag for you that you have gotten yourself into a relationship that's changing you in a way that you don't want to change. That's just the first point right there. But the second thing that it should show you is maybe you've been manipulated to give up oranges that were special, vulnerable, special, valuable things inside of you. Like I touched on in my video, 4 Ways That Adults Are Groomed, I call the valuable things inside of us oranges. And maybe you've been tricked and duped into giving away oranges that are actually very valuable, but you've been tricked to give them away for free, thinking that they weren't valuable after all. Or that maybe you did want to give them away. You've had someone convince you to change your mind. And that's another very powerful thing that can show you a lot about the person that you're with. My entire point being, how fragile and helpless are they really if they've gotten you to change your entire lifestyle, your moral system that you guide yourself by, the goals for yourself, and the things that are important to you, if they've gotten you to discard those things? How fragile and helpless are they really if they were able to get you to change your entire life for them? That seems pretty powerful and manipulative to me. I totally forgot to do an outro video. Anyway, those are my main points. If any of you have thoughts on like the child version of someone that you've experienced and I didn't touch on like some of the ways that maybe it also can show up, feel free to leave a comment down below. I feel like I definitely didn't encapsulate like all of the ways that the fragile, helpless child shows up. So definitely let me know if you've had your own experiences, but those were just kind of my thoughts. Anyway, thanks as always for watching, and God bless.